Hello.
Our story begins on Naboo with a communication relay between Count Dooku of Serenno and Senator Amidala of the Republic. This was perhaps the biggest deal in the entire war effort. The trade of two of the greatest warriors on both sides of the conflict. General Grievous had been captured by the Gungans, and Anakin defeated by Dooku. The stakes couldn't be higher. On the hologram, she watched Count Dooku lower his hand, and two Magna Guards shocked Anakin behind him. The Sith Lord told the Senator that the deal was simple: deliver General Grievous to him, and she could have Skywalker back. A thought rushed through her mind. She loved Anakin more than anyone else in her life. They were united as partners, but this was bigger than them. It always had been. They were public servants, and she wanted to save him, but General Grievous had already killed millions of people. How many more needed to be sacrificed? Dooku started to confirm a meetup, and instead, she ended the communication. Tyrannus was well aware of Skywalker's attachments. Lord Sidious told him everything about Anakin, because Dooku needed to use that information against him. After all, Dooku was pretty much a glorified trainer, and he was instructing his future replacement too. He used the attachment between Anakin and Padme against her, and to his surprise, it did not work. While Palpatine could protect Nute Gunray before the war, not even his court, completely appointed by himself, would allow Grievous to get off scot-free. The droid general would not survive. The moment the transmission ended, Tyrannus got into contact with Sidious. The Sith Lord, who saw Anakin in the background over the hologram, told Tyrannus to send a fleet to intercept a senator. She needed to be killed. Grievous could not be returned to Coruscant. But Padme also knew these odds. She didn't wait for Republic Venators to arrive. She did request that they be brought to Naboo, anticipating an attack would come. But she took her Senator vessel and departed immediately, with Grievous in restraints, and kept in them by the Gungans who captured him. She didn't narrowly escape the incoming Separatist fleet. She left Naboo before they even jumped to hyperspace. Dooku, who was still on planet with Skywalker, needed to find his own route off the system, but N1 starfighters were patrolling over the skies. Senator Amidala, though, told Republic High Command that Count Dooku was also on Naboo, and Anakin was captured. So, the fleet sent to assist her with finding Anakin was General Windus, because he was in the area. His massive fleet arrived over the system first, and gunships sped over the surface of Naboo to try and find Tyrannus. The next fleet to arrive would be the Separatists, and a massive space battle would ensue. Droids and clones added again, defending a system that saw the true first battle of the Sith resurgence. Dooku walked through the catacombs of his little lair, and quickly got his prisoner and the Magna Guards to his solar sailor. Thanks to the attack, N1 starfighters that had been patrolling the surface for Dooku were redirected into space. This left only gunships and a variety of starfighters behind to continue the search. Inside the cove, he hid in his ship. He watched gunships pass by, before giving his droid pilot the signal. The solar sailor peeled out of the cave and floated towards space. Master Windu saw the ship and pulled over to intercept, but by the time he got a lock on his old friend, Dooku jumped to hyperspace. Mace smacked his console, frustratedly. He was hoping to disable the star vessel, so they could capture Dooku and save Anakin, who was probably still with him. The rest of the battle for Naboo would be a Republic victory. The Separatists were merely there for Senator Amidala and Grievous. They had no other reason to continue fighting. The fleet would end up mostly destroyed, and Windu would be rerouted to his own campaign. On Coruscant, though, everything changed. The Jedi assisted the Gungan High Guardsmen with bringing Grievous into the maximum security prison. The courts would be on the case within the next 12 hours, because the arrival transpired at night on Coruscant. Sidious was on planet, and he wanted to free the droid general, but they also had contingencies for that. On the world of Wayland, where a top-secret Republic facility had been constructed, a man named Dr. Hemlock was mastering Kaminoan cloning technology. General Grievous's blood had been drawn prior to him reawakening as a cyborg, and it was inside of Mount Tantus. The Chancellor may have not had the full legality to create this facility, but it technically wasn't even on the records. Ever since the formation of his executive powers in the Emergency Powers Act in 24 BBY, Palpatine had been concealing Imperial projects from the Republic. He had Mount Tantus working on his long-in-the-works necromancer strategy. At this point, it was just a strategy, not a real project. Hemlock was creating a biometric creature that could act, fight, and speak like Grievous. His numerous defeats forced Sidious and Tyrannus to consider options for replacing him. It turns out that Grievous would need to be replaced now. The courts would soon have him executed in front of the Republic for war crimes against the people of the galaxy. This was a political statement more than anything. The Republic was proving that they were the government of the galaxy, and that nothing would survive this war if it continued to spiral out of control. It definitely sent a message to the Confederacy, but not to the Sith. They didn't care. Hemlock's General Grievous clone looked and acted more like an HK model unit. Its personality was cynical, and as per Sidious's instructions, he wanted the cyborg clone to download all possible information inside the Separatist database. This would be the next level of tactical droids. Thanks to the upgrades made in the previous few months, with the new additions of super tactical droids finding themselves inside the droid army, the natural thought was that this Grievous clone would be the super tactical droid. It was a one-of-a-kind supercomputer that processed reason, strategy, and considered troop numbers for an added benefit. Hemlock, per Palpatine's request, set this droid up to be the closest sentient AI droid to date. It was meant to embody everything Grievous was, but perfect all of his flaws. Additionally, every single lightsaber form, technique, and strategy were implemented into his system. And finally, because Sidious wanted a true mastermind computer by his side, the droid was outfitted with a mix of Cortosis and Beskar armor, making it nearly impenetrable. There were contingencies for the Sith Lord in the case that things went awry, but he wanted the Grievous Mark II to be everything that the former Kalesh warrior could not be. Hemlock used a little play on words to simplify the name into Flagitious, not only villainous, but the flagship model of what Hemlock thought Palpatine would want, a brilliant and powerful droid army, more capable than what the Confederacy could produce and better than the clones. On the planet of Lola Sayu, Dooku's solar sailor descended onto a landing platform of the Citadel. The Warden, Osi Sobek, stepped out to greet Count Dooku. The Sith Lord had Anakin escorted inside and gave the Warden a specific regiment of torture. Dooku wanted to kill young Skywalker so badly, but Sidious had changed his plans. He would use the refused trade agreement between Amidala and Tyrannus as the perfect tool for transforming Anakin into an agent of evil. Palpatine wanted Skywalker to think that his own wife betrayed him and then forgot about him. He wanted Anakin to believe that the Jedi Order never gave him a second thought. This, like Flagitious, was an experiment. Anakin wouldn't just undergo isolation, feel betrayal, and lack decency at the hands of his captors, but also receive various forms of torment to create Darth Vader. Sidious saw this as the perfect experiment. They could break Anakin down, and then Palpatine would be the one to save him. He planned to show Anakin the recording of Senator Amidala betraying him, then slowly force his descent into madness, and just at the perfect moment of breaking, Lord Sidious would arrive and save the day. It would be the perfect way to turn Anakin to the dark side. Tyrannus didn't necessarily consider what the implications of this meant for him. When Anakin woke up, his cell was dark, not pitch black, but pretty much too dark to see anything. He heard a constant ringing in his ears. Or perhaps it was the cell he was placed into. Anakin gripped the floors and touched the walls. He regained an understanding of his senses, and in one unexpected moment, the lights in the room flashed as brightly as possible, and then the beeping continued as they turned off. Anakin grabbed his head, and his eyes blurred everywhere. He was just blinded by the light of the sun, basically, and he stumbled over and slammed his head into the wall, before falling onto the non-cushioned slab. That would be considered a bed in this hellhole. Anakin rolled on his side and rubbed his eyes. He twisted on the bed and the door shot open, revealing a dim hallway. Skywalker twisted over and tried to look, but the silhouette was too hard to make out. Instead of words, he was met with electricity. A burning white and blue light covered his body, and he cried in agony, falling off the bed and writhing on the floor. Dooku continued for a few more moments, before stopping and using the Force to levitate a hologram onto the floor. It shot to life. It replayed everything that transpired between Dooku and Padme. Tyrannus didn't change or quote-unquote fix anything with the dialogue. He played Anakin the exact conversation, word for word, beat for beat. He even let Skywalker see the torture he received, and Padme's reaction. She seemed hurt, but she didn't make a reaction that Dooku considered to be caring. Anakin watched the blue light of his wife fade, as a hologram was pulled up to Dooku's pocket, and 2 Manda guards walked in right past him. The Warden then followed up. Osi Sobek introduced himself as Master of Anakin Skywalker for the rest of his days. The Jedi would not come to save him, the clones would forget about him, and his friends didn't care what happened. Anakin looked at Osi, and he gave a couple more vague sentences before turning and walking out of the room. Anakin's initial thoughts were to ignore what Dooku or Osi said to him. The thing is, he knew Padme. He understood what most of her facial reactions were. He knew when she was genuinely worried or concerned, because that was at the very least an emotion she expressed to him around him. Anakin trusted himself, and while he wouldn't say it to those who imprisoned him, he did find value in knowing the truth. He and Padme loved each other. She wasn't leaving him behind out of spite, but because she knew the cost of the trade. If she traded Grievous back to the Confederacy, millions would die. The war might never end. Anakin knew his partner. He knew what would motivate her the most. She wouldn't leave Anakin to suffer out of anything other than care for the galaxy. She loved him. Those repeating words filled his mind, and he passed out again on the floor. The following few days would include a variety of torture methods, meant to force Anakin into the dark side, but he rejected most of it at every turn. The Warden did everything Dooku wanted him to do, and Anakin refused to break. He did become angrier, but he didn't release his latch on the Jedi path. There were other attempts made to force Anakin to betray his morals, but he refused each of them. The Warden even made some specific holograms to make it appear that Padme forgot all about him, but Anakin immediately recognized the difference in her voice and in her appearance. The mannerisms were also off too. There was nothing rewarding about remaining here. He was being broken down by every passing hour. Sometimes they would poison his food and make him regurgitate it, hopefully not on his bed. They'd spin the room around, soak him in water, zap the walls if he was sleeping against it, whatever they could to physically torment him. Anakin, who was known for his loud and explosive personality, remained quiet. He didn't want his enemies to understand him. He suffered because of it, but he refused to show cracks in his surface. As he rejected delving into the dark side, he dissociated from his body. It helped mitigate the pain temporarily, and it helped him harmonize with the Force rather than the dark. And yes, while it would make more sense for Anakin to try and escape, he knew what he was dealing with. The Citadel was renowned for being inescapable. No one got out, and rescuers never got in. It was a death trap, designed to keep Jedi. Anakin believed in the Council, and Obi-Wan, Padme, and Ahsoka. He knew that they would come for him at some point. When that might be, he didn't really know. But that singular focus of trust is what gave him the strength to persist. On the other side of the galaxy, Legitius joined up with General Grievous's fleet, and all returned to normal. The war kicked back off. The Republic expected a reaction, and instead, a couple of previously captured Jedi Knights were murdered on the steps of the Confederacy Parliament building. There was a distinct difference in the reaction to Grievous's death and the death of the Jedi. The General wasn't seen as a sentient being by most separatists. Either they knew he was a cyborg, or just saw him as a droid. In the end, he was a means to independence from the Republic. The Jedi, though, while being enemies of the state, were still seen as people. They may have been flawed individuals, but it created a separation of trust between the faction and its citizens. The deaths certainly were not enough to create a movement, but they would be enough to change something for someone else. The new general of the droid army, Legitius, was a sentient creature constructed in a lab. Dr. Hemlock created him to be the perfect model. The droid was fine initially, that wasn't the problem. What was, and what did eventually become the problem, was the information within his head. Most of the droids in the CIS military came from the Federation, Techno Union, and sometimes the Commerce Guild. Legitius came from Mount Tantus on Wayland. The process used to construct him was much different. The droid army was used for military. Hemlock used Legitius for information and science. The problem wasn't apparent initially, but these executions led directly to an awakening. His reasoning was based on his orders. Where Grievous had loyalty to the Sith for having saved him, Legitius was not. He was created and told to listen to orders. But when a device with unlimited access to information, a fully formed and mobilized military at its disposal, and the reason of a sentient comes to a conclusion, it can decide the fate of billions or even trillions. Legitius wasn't a malevolent creation. He was a general, one meant to show the Jedi and Republic that no matter who they killed, whether it be Grievous or someone else, that they could replace that individual with a cybernetic enhanced version. Legitius had already killed a couple of Jedi, mostly because of the Cortosis and Beskar armor protecting him, but he still killed them. The droid general on the bridge of the flagship sat with a plug driven into his wrist into the ship itself. Information flowed through his body, and it meshed with every single order he had been given by Dooku, Hemlock, and Sidious. All of those desires, wants, and needs combined into one. He was ordered to defeat the Republic, to win the battles he was allowed to win, and listen specifically to Dooku, and/or Sidious if it came to it. Questions from that arose though. Why not use the Droid Reserve Force? How could they form peace if both governments were led by the Old One's representatives? Could a society be perfectly formed under Dooku's rule? Legitius came to the conclusion that none of these things were possible with a galactic population. He was created to bring the galaxy to a Confederacy victory, but now he realized that no peace could be obtained through Tyrannus. In the span of 24 hours, Legitius spiraled into madness and came to a resolution. He may have served for a couple months as their leader. In an instant, the Separatist Reserve Force was activated and unleashed against the CIS. As he took control over the reserve military, he also began working on breaking down the contingency orders to make the entire droid army rebellious. Order 99 could not be used, so every communication went through code language, and the actual transmissions were completely cut off by Legitius the moment he started war on the galaxy. He felt no sympathy for Grievous or the Jedi that were executed, but he recognized that nothing would ever change. These governments would copy each other until the galaxy fell apart, and more of his battle droids would suffer the consequences of that. If they wanted the one resolution the Sith wanted, then it had to be attained through total destruction. His initial strikes created such mass death that Anakin across the stars inside the Citadel felt everything. He pulled at his head and his heart as he shuffled across the chambers in agony. The pain of this mass death was almost too much to handle. In this, Anakin was pulled into what he would refer to as the dream world, Mortis. This wasn't as physical as it was last time. It was an empty domain, without the father, daughter, or son. But he walked between life and death, as the Force called out for a savior. Small wounds were created as a result. Some of them would be genuine Force-sensitive individuals, like Nihilus, who could only consume. Others would be just portals of darkness in the galaxy. Legitius' strikes were painful for every Force-sensitive that could feel it. The Sith tried to draw off of it, but even they became concerned. The Jedi were perhaps weaker than they ever had been since the attack on Coruscant in the Old Republic, but the Sith couldn't capitalize off of it. Sidious and Tyrannus realized, after the first few assaults by Legitius, that they wouldn't have a galaxy to rule if they did not stop the droid armies. They quickly gathered up what forces they could, still under their control, and moved for the heart of the storm. Skywalker, though, after months of being stuck in this hellhole, looked as if he were experiencing an exorcism. His mind was pulled to this world, left dead by his actions or inaction, depending on one's perspective. He wheezed and heaved with every passing second. The lives lost needed to be saved, and as the Chosen One, he was left here. Osi, having been tasked with keeping Anakin trapped, was not permitted to let him die. Medical droids and Magna Guards were sent into the room to help Anakin. When they arrived, he was hunched over in the middle of the room, murmuring something to someone. Anakin wasn't sure who it was, but he could feel the darkness surrounding the galaxy. He focused specifically on the small little bit of light still remaining on Mortis. It was a spark of light, and it spoke to him. The voice wasn't familiar, and it wasn't really a voice. What was said was simply understood. Anakin could feel the pressure on his shoulders lift off of him. The spark consoled him, warmed his heart, and brought him peace. When he woke up in the medical bay, he searched the room and saw the warden. With his hands, he reached out and force-choked Osi. The warden lifted off the ground and Anakin, with his metallic hand, ripped the restraints off of himself. Every droid in the room activated, and Skywalker used the Force to crush them by throwing them in the different ends of the room. Anakin broke the neck of Osi and tossed his body to the side. Anakin took a step forward towards the door and fell, hitting the ground. He replayed the words spoken to him by the Spark. He didn't know what it was. It could be any number of things, whether it be the Force itself, a Mortis god, maybe the original Jedi. He did not know. But they told him to trust his will. He was here for a reason. Anakin buckled again, and when his eyes opened, he was back on Mortis again. He could see worlds getting leveled, and Flagitius inside the flagship, changing his strategy to wipe out governments on each world. The mass death was slowly stopping, but he wouldn't be deterred for long. The populations that survived his following attacks would see some semblance of protection, until Flagitius grew tired of them. The Republic reacted with their own set of bills to push out a larger army from Kamino, and the Navy prepared to counter the new droid general. But the problem is, Flagitius was backsiding the Republic on Coruscant. He had all the hidden routes provided by Sidious, and he knew the Sith would try and challenge him at one point or another. Anakin viewed the quickly changing galactic environment and begged faceless ghouls inside of his head to stop this. He was again forced from Mortis and crashed down inside the medical bay of the Citadel. Inside, he was now surrounded by a number of Magna Guards. With the last bit of his strength, he lifted them all up with the Force and crushed them with the flex of his two fists. He grabbed a staff and ran into the corridors of the facility. When he eventually reached the command tower, he would easily deal with the commando droids and other sentries in the area. Moments after, every single prison cell inside the structure would be unlocked, and prisoners would be free to escape. Some of them being Jedi, others being Force experiments or Force sensitives apprehended by the Sith. Anakin found his lightsaber and prepared Osi's shuttle for departure. He knew what he needed to know. He had to save the galaxy now. The Sith were falling behind Flagitius. They were initially, as they thought, on his trail, but he moved on without them. The droid general was just hours away from appearing over Coruscant, with an attack force that would level the government. But as he was moving through hyperspace, Flagitius noticed something. He'd been at this attack for a little over a week. Halfway through the week, he realized that maybe entire populations didn't need to die, and just their governments, so he changed his strategy. What he noticed was that on systems where only a population's government was destroyed, the people fought back against the sentries put in place. It was at this that Flagitius realized that the only path towards total peace was through galactic population elimination. He had stopped his carnage because his analysis came to the conclusion that governments were the problem, not the people. But the people proved their natural instinct for violence on every system. But he hadn't interpreted what he saw as reality. The reason the people attacked the droids was out of fear. The people of Coruscant would pay for what Flagitius realized. When the CIS fleet arrived at a hyperspace, the Republic Defense Fleet wasn't prepared. Air raid alarms were sounded in the city, and vulture droids descended without much of a problem. The Republic was making counters to the mass loss of life. They never anticipated the CIS to find a way around them. So within the first 20 minutes of the battle starting, General Flagitius was sending droid forces towards the surface. Their missions were simple: kill everything. This resulted in the Republic quickly mobilizing escorts to remove people from the system or get them to the underworld. Most of the people in the city, from the wealthier districts, elected to retreat from the capital, and they would die. The less wealthy people moved for the portals to the underworld. In space, the Republic fleet got clobbered by continuous attacks. Flagitius watched from his bridge as the first few warships broke past the Republic defense line into the atmosphere. Cannons fired and devastated skyscrapers around the city. People who believed in the Republic Defense Force were killed immediately. The Jedi gathered together everyone they could to assist with the evacuation and the defense. Inside the flagship of Flagitius's fleet, the two Sith arrived. Tyrannus and Sidious had been tracking their opponent from Raxus all the way to Coruscant. He was leveling out the playing field. The governments of the galaxy were under siege, and unlike the people of the Confederacy, Coruscant actually had a defense fleet. The battle raged on, and inside the halls, Sidious and Tyrannus cut through every single battle droid that came their way. It was a seamless duo. They were monstrous with their sabers and their force powers. Flagitious was far from any of those things, so he simply watched from afar on the hallway security cameras. He didn't stop them with ray shields because he wanted to kill them inside the command bridge, which is what he would attempt to do when they arrived. At the sight of them, physically at the end of the room, he would magnetize to the floor and burst the windows open. This didn't kill the Sith because they both grabbed onto an inanimate object long enough for the automatic retractors to shield the command bridge, and thus the duel began. Elsewhere over Coruscant, supporting ships arrived at a hyperspace. They couldn't do much against the overwhelming Separatist force. However, because around half the fleet was already on Coruscant, leveling the cities, the Republic had a chance to slowly break down the invading force. With Flagitious distracted by the duel inside the command bridge, he couldn't properly communicate a counter to his fleet. So tactical droids and captains wheeled their ships about. Without active communication channels and by using code, they were slowed down. Sidious and Tyrannus inside the bridge clobbered away at the droid. They accidentally kept hitting the Cortosis and being forced to defend themselves from swinging sabers. Palpatine tried to use electricity on the droid, but it didn't stop him. Dooku tried a force choke, but it proved ineffective, and their sabers couldn't break the armor. Flagitious mocked them throughout the duel, because he knew they would never be able to stop him. The Sith tried everything, and then, the vessel came under heavy fire. Flagitious ordered the command deck towards the surface of the planet, where they could hide in the ashes of civilization, and it was acted upon. Just as the starship descended, a shuttle flipped into the hangar bay, and out popped Anakin. The battle was going terribly for everyone. Not only was the capital a wasteland, with unknown numbers of people dead, but the CIS force was slowly breaking apart due to its early success. Flagitious wouldn't have broken the fleet up if he thought it would cost him the battle, but here he was, fighting for his life inside and outside the bridge. This wasn't just at Coruscant. The Republic launched counterattacks at several other locations where the fleets were located. This was used to incentivize a CIS rebellion against the Confederacy. The Republic government figured that the CIS would lose their popularity if they continued genociding their own populations, because 7 to 18 systems were getting taken out per day inside CIS territory. It was a 4D chess move that would have really helped if the government still stood. But the population was arming itself for more droid invasions, and clone forces started battles against these CIS fleets. When Anakin reached the command bridge, he found the two Sith actively struggling against the droid commander, who weaved his stolen sabers at his opponents. Their contingencies would not work here. The clashing echoed out, and Skywalker watched from afar, not drawing anyone's attention, as he gathered everything he needed to know about his droid opponent. Having been kept inside the Citadel for however long, he didn't really know, he wouldn't be powerful enough to hold a duel against the likes of the Sith. But he did recognize the weakness in Flagitious' attacks. That might make him susceptible to a Jedi approach. He watched for longer than even he would like to admit, but eventually the Sith fell one at a time, and Flagitious prepared to rout his forces so they could keep this empire alive. Anakin, of course, planned to put an end to it. He walked in, demanding an understanding from Flagitious. The mass death was clearly started because of him. Anakin wasn't even meant to run into Flagitious because he was just returning to Coruscant and a space battle happened to be transpiring. Flagitious, though, wasn't here for the sentimental Jedi BS. He had seen their files, what they really were. Anakin ignited his saber and raised it to his chest as Flagitious monologued about his purpose. He knew that Skywalker was important to the Jedi and the Republic, so he wanted him to know the truth before he lost all of it. The truth about the galaxy was that it needed a clean slate to finally find its peace, and Anakin cut him off. Instead of putting up a fight, he raised his hand and used the Force on the droid. This wasn't an aggressive show of power. It wasn't a force choke or electricity. It was subtle and peaceful. Similar to the jarring interaction with the spark on Mortis instead of his head, Anakin gave the droid general a calming approach. Inside the droid's mind, he saw flashes of positive memories, all the beautiful things. Instead of death and war created by governments, Flagitious realized a new possibility. Anakin grew up a slave, but he had the love of a mother. There was fun with friends, joy with peers. Skywalker's child life was good. It transitioned to friends inside the Jedi Temple and growing with Master Kenobi. Flagitious got to see Anakin's love grow with Padme, and the sibling relationship he formed with Ahsoka, and many of the clones he became close with. There was so much wrong in the galaxy, but Flagitious was missing the beauty by simply taking in all the terrible. The Sith were horrible, the war even worse. But if he takes the galaxy for all that its governments do, then he wasn't seeing the full picture. The droid creature stumbled and gripped the command console, and Anakin continued pouring information into the droid's mind, before placing his saber right next to an open slot and igniting it. And one of the cables from his system activated, flipping loosely out. Skywalker saw it, and with the mechanic's eye, he plugged into the console and told Flagitious to make it right. The droid's circuitry slowly started to come apart. Everything that he was meant nothing. Even the contingencies that Sidious and Hemlock created failed, but not the full picture. Flagitious could inhale information, but he couldn't experience it. Skywalker gave the droid the most personal experience with the life of a sentient as possible, and as a result, the last words that Flagitious uttered were, "It's beautiful." And his final words were his final commands: the shutdown of all battle droids. The transmission code would be sent out to every system in the Confederacy, and the droids would follow it. Again, it wouldn't be automatic, but it would see 98% of all droid forces shutting down and ending their war against the people of the galaxy. Anakin, as a result, needed a run, because the command deck shut down, and the ship hit the side of a skyscraper before slowly drifting towards the surface. Anakin eventually did escape the vessel, using an escape pod and shooting into a high-rise apartment. The people inside were just as surprised to see him as he was them. The fall of the Confederacy wasn't a galactic government destroying another. It was a complete and societal collapse. General Grievous's replacement accomplished everything he wished he could have, but Flagitious was truly, in the end, an instrument of the Sith, a glorified version of what their order stood for. He was corrupted not because of what the Sith told him, but because he couldn't truly comprehend reason from the horror of sentient life. The Sith expected him to be a cog, but he was still a clone, still sentient somewhere in there, yearning for something he could never attain. The inefficiencies, mistakes, and even stupidity don't necessarily call for the total annihilation of everything. It wasn't until Anakin showed the droid general the bright side of existence that he realized what he did was for nothing. The remaining power structure wouldn't include a lot of ultra-wealthy individuals. Their belief that fleeing Coruscant in the middle of a battle would save them cost them their lives. Senators like Padme, who stayed with the people as they went to the portals to the underworld, survived because they were unselfish. Little ironic, actually. She had the opportunity as an upper-class citizen and government official to escape with the rich, but she chose the people. This would leave the galaxy with a huge gap in leadership. No one knew what to do or where to go, and so the Republic High Command called for reconstruction. The Jedi would also be slightly involved, which would lead to a ton of colliding heads. The galaxy was broken, almost beyond repair. The old system hadn't just been redirected, but uprooted. Anakin would, before the reconstruction begun, find Padme and reunite. She felt terrible over everything that happened, and the fact that the Jedi couldn't get to the Citadel because of Flagitious. But nothing needed to be said. He believed her. No matter the darkest moments he suffered, he found her and trusted that she did not betray him, or send him to the Citadel which she didn't even know existed. While the Republic would never be the same, the government would reform around stronger structure. The center would be made of new faces and survivors. People that had seen the worst of the war, greed, and corruption planned to stop it from ever rising again. While it wasn't the Order's first choice, the Jedi would find themselves as integral pieces inside the new government. This is how Anakin and Padme would live their lives, as representatives individually for the Republic and for the Jedi. It helped keep their relationship secret, and it also forced Naboo and the Order to align on a lot of early reconstruction problems. By the time they started having children, the galaxy would be climbing out of dystopia. It would take generations to resolve the carnage and rebuild what had been lost, but it also provided generations, like the ones that Anakin and Padme's grandchildren would see, the chance to create a galaxy that truly benefited people everywhere. And that, my friends, is our twisted, semi-dark story Special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the story. This is a little dark. It really is a little dark. This is a story I've been trying to write for a while, and I kind of settled on this idea. I really liked the idea of, like, kind of, what if the prisoner swap didn't go well? And I think initially going into it, you expect the Republic to win because Grievous is an instrumental piece. But we are talking about Sidious and Dooku here. They are controlling the war, and even if the governments think that peace can be obtained without Grievous, Sidious and Dooku are still in control. And so I thought it made sense to have like this kind of clone droid of Dooku, not of Dooku, of Grievous, be like the main villain. Obviously I think it was HK-47 for the character model in the story. But I liked the idea of having this individual creature. It's like Ultron. It's like a sentient version of Ultron, I think, where it is a sentient being. It is literally a clone. It's just that it's more machine than man, basically. It's basically like Darth Vader, but like 1% man. This character kind of just struggles because it's just absorbing information. It's like, okay, my orders are to resolve this, and the only way to do that is get rid of it. But the reason, the human factor of this creature just doesn't exist. It doesn't have that factor. And even though Grievous is a brute warrior, he is a sentient, he is a person. And so that part of him, that 1% or 2%, what have you, is what ends up being the reason he is able to come to the conclusion that his last action needs to be something beautiful. As for like Anakin in the story, it's kind of like the Dooku video I did a while back where Dooku defeats him and then captures Palpatine, Obi-Wan, and Anakin and put them in like a room together. I just kind of liked having the idea of Anakin have this experience where he has to kind of grapple with the idea that Padme may have betrayed him, but he knows that she wouldn't. And then him also kind of having this Force-related vision where he has to go about saving the galaxy in a way that really isn't the most similar to him. Like, his initial thought would be like, alright, I'm gonna beat the shit out of whoever it is, and then he gets there and it's not the case. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, remember my friends, may the Force be with you.